Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our introduction to Snyk Infrastructure as Code, a brand new product from us here at Snyk, and I'm really excited to share this product with you today. My name is Jim. I have Ben LaPlanche here with us as well today. We're both on the product team. Really excited to hear your feedback about Snyk Infrastructure as Code, and we'll do some demos today as well, so you can actually see the product, and we'll show you how you can actually get started with the product in your own accounts. As a reminder, if you've never used GoToWebinar before, there's a questions panel in the GoToWebinar screens, and you can type your questions in there as we go. Ben will be available to answer some of those, and we'll have plenty of time at the end. This is a relatively short presentation and demo, so we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer questions as well. But feel free to just type your questions in there as we go, and we'll answer those. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump in. We are also recording today's presentation, so if you want to review this later, or if you want to share it with others, we'll have that available to you as well. And we're happy to share all this material with folks if you would like it. If you're here today, you're probably very familiar with what infrastructure as code is, and I assume your organization probably uses one or more different formats of infrastructure as code. And maybe even before I dive into to what we're doing specifically, let's go ahead and launch a poll question here, because I'm kind of curious as to what types of infrastructure as code all of you are using. So if you could click on that, I would appreciate that. We'd love to see what the distribution is here, the different tools that people are using. I'll talk about specifically what we cover with Snyk Infrastructure as Code today. But we're also thinking about the future and other things that we might do as we continue to add to that product. So if you have a chance, go ahead and click on that. I realize as well that some of you probably use multiple formats, and so it's hard to maybe to capture that with a poll question that only lets you put in five responses, and one of those is others. But just pick the ones that are sort of closest to what you use, and feel free to put it into the questions panel or the chat as well if there's other things that are important to you. Looks like we're getting some consensus here. A huge percentage of people using Terraform, almost everybody. Large percentage using Kubernetes, and some cloud-specific things as well, and then a bunch of others. So that's about what we're seeing across the board. So we've got, just for people that are curious, about 92% of the folks said Terraform, 58% on Kubernetes, 42% on the cloud specific, and then 17% on others. So not terribly unusual. We see that a lot with customers that we've talked to and users that we've talked to about infrastructure as code as we built this product and did our research there. We've started with infrastructure as code, specifically looking at things like Kubernetes and various formats of Kubernetes. We're looking at YAML and JSON, as well as Helm charts, and then Terraform as well. And with Terraform specifically, we started with the AWS provider. And most of you are using Terraform, you know that there's a number of providers that are out there. We chose AWS just because it's the #1 cloud provider out there. We'll probably expand to other providers fairly quickly though as well. But we're also looking beyond that and what other types of formats. This is, as we plan this product out, it's something that we want to go, somewhat broad on. And so for those of you who picked cloud-specific things like CloudFormation and ARM and Google cloud deployments, those are things that we're considering as well. So again, an area we'd really love to hear your feedback as we continue to grow this product and know what we can build for you. But more broadly, right, the problem with these is that it's very easy to write these. It's very easy to go and get examples of this code, and also get examples that don't have any security constraints or security configurations set up in them, and to do this wrong. And so that's what we're trying to solve with this, is get security information into the hands of the developers and the application teams early, as they start to write their applications, as they start to think about what a deployment with the infrastructure for these applications will look like, and make sure that they are configuring those deployments, whether it's Kubernetes or Terraform or something else. They're configuring those things correctly early. Most of you are probably very security conscious if you're not security engineers, given the fact that you're here today. So you're probably aware of a lot of these issues When we talk to customers about this, what we hear a lot is the security folks are very aware of the problem, and even the developers are very aware of the problem. Making it part of that development lifecycle, putting it where developers are so that it can be a part of the everyday workflow has been a challenge. And so that's where Snyk really fits, is trying to make it part of that workflow. Again, as we go out and we did research for this, I'm not trying to pick on Terraform, saying that there's anything bad inherently about Terraform with these stats. It's just a fact of the matter that when people tend to get started with something new, they tend to go look at what other people have done, and they copy that and use that as sort of their starting templates. And with Terraform, there's hundreds of thousands of example files that you could go get that are just publicly available on GitHub. We did some research on those, and for the ones that are publicly available on GitHub that are deploying resources to AWS, 35% of them are allowing unrestricted inbound network access. Now, that may not always be bad. Web servers you probably want to have unrestricted inbound access to, but sometimes it is a little more sensitive. And we found a pretty significant number that are allowing unrestricted inbound access to things like SSH, which generally speaking, you probably don't want unrestricted inbound access to. And that's just Terraform. Kubernetes, I would argue, is far worse than Terraform at this. And if you're familiar with Kubernetes, and a large chunk of you are, obviously, you know that Kubernetes by itself doesn't really enforce any type of security for deployments or for pods or any of those types of things. And so it's very easy to go and find Kubernetes files that don't have any security context settings or any they're not ensuring that people don't run their containers as root. And if you're starting with that, and that's how you're learning, then you're not going to include that security as part of your natural process. And that's what we want to fix with Snyk infrastructure as code. For those that may be a little less familiar with Snyk, one of the things that Snyk does or a couple of things that Snyk does aside from infrastructure as code, this whole idea of getting the security information in front of developers and making that accessible to them, something that they can easily work in without necessarily becoming deep security experts, right? Most developers are under a time crunch and they don't have the time and the resources to go investigating CVEs or to read benchmarks or all those kinds of things. It's not that they're uninterested in security. Most of them probably are. They just don't have the time to become deep experts on all these things. And so we want to take what the security teams know and what the security teams want as best practices, and we want to make that something that's accessible to developers across the board. As we look at applications and how applications are changing, more and more of the stack is becoming code, and infrastructure as code is another step in that direction. So obviously the code itself, there's open source dependencies which are coming from third parties and tend to be these days even a broader set of the applications. There's containers, there's infrastructure as code. All these things relate back to third-party libraries and code files that are pulling in things that give a developer the ability to control more of that stack, but also opens up new areas of security concerns that we all need to be aware of. And so that's what Snyk overall is trying to solve. So we have, if you're not familiar with Snyk, if this is kind of an introduction to Snyk for you, just really quickly, aside from the infrastructure as code product, we have two other products. We have Snyk Open Source, which was our original product that deals with those open source dependencies. So as you build these new applications and you have open source dependencies that you're pulling in, this does that static analysis of those open source dependencies to find vulnerabilities there and help people fix them automatically. We'll do things like auto fixes, not necessarily always auto fixes, but we can do fix PRs and those kinds of things to help address those open source code vulnerabilities. We have a container product as well. Again, I think the thing that sets our container product apart, it does vulnerability scans, but our real goal is to provide information that helps a developer fix the container. So it's not just a list of vulnerabilities, but it's pointers to, here's a better base image for you to use that will cut out 100 vulnerabilities, and here's a line in your Docker file that introduced these vulnerabilities. So relevant information to a developer. And then infrastructure as code follows that same pattern. Security information is really important, but how do we get the right information to a developer so that they can focus on what they need to, fix what they need to, and then move on. So again, all of this meant to be developer first. We have a fantastic security team, and they work across all of these different products. We have a security team that's focused now on infrastructure as code as well, and really making sure that this is something that scales up as you start to deploy more and more applications. So with that said, let's talk a bit about the infrastructure as code product itself. So as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at Kubernetes and Terraform, and specifically in Kubernetes, we're looking at JSON and YAML and Helm charts. And with Terraform, we've started with the AWS provider, and of course, we plan to do more there. The way that it works is just via Git integration. So you can use GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, etc. If you're not familiar with Snyk, I'll show you this in just a second, but if you're not familiar with Snyk, we integrate with those. You import a repository or all of your repositories, and we go out and we check for these types of files, and then we'll report on, configuration information or misconfiguration information that we find in those files. It's the same import flow. If you've used Snyk open source before, it's the same import flow and integration that you have with Snyk open source. And in fact, one scan will get all of these different types of files. And so you can do all those things. That's how we started. Now we're adding additional capabilities. So you'll see in the demo that we have the ability to scan some infrastructure as code files via our CLI, and we plan to do more in the future. But that's where we started, was with the Git-based imports. So I'll show you that here in just a second. The other side of that then is, once we have that information, we want to make sure that we present the information in a way that's friendly to developers. So in our UI, we'll show you side by side, and this is a little bit different. So if you have seen some of the other Snyk products, this interface is a little bit different in that we show you side by side. Here are the issues, and here is your code file. That's particularly important for infrastructure as code, because these aren't vulnerabilities. You don't just upgrade a package. You have to make specific configuration changes to fix these things. And it's important to show people and help educate folks on where these fixes should be in their files. And it makes it simpler when you have those two things side by side. A common question that comes up here is, are you storing all this code on your servers, and what access do you have to it? The answer to that, in case it is a question you have, is we don't store your code on our server. So we do this dynamically. We're plugged into the Git repo. As you pull up a file or pull up a report on a file, we dynamically display the code for you. So we're not storing your code on our servers. Anyway, I'll show you that in the demo, but again, the important point here is we want to make these things very easy for developers to consume and be able to use. As I mentioned before, we're scanning both Kubernetes and Terraform. With Kubernetes, a lot of the checks that we're doing today come from community best practices, open sources of information about what should be done in Kubernetes. If you go to, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if you go to the Kubernetes website, you'll find tons of examples for deployments, and they have a section that mentions security constraints or security contexts and pod security policies and those kinds of things. By and large, though, the example deployment files that we would find on Kubernetes, aside from those specific pages, don't include the security information. So again, if you're just copying examples that you might find on kubernetes.io, chances are it's not going to have the security settings in it unless you're specifically on the security page. So you may not even know that they exist. But nonetheless, they are documented, and we captured a lot of that in the rules that we have today. The other is Terraform, and with Terraform, very similar, right? There are written best practices and things like the CIS benchmarks and others that have captured at least a starting point for what you should do on AWS, and we've started with that same starting point for things like Terraform. But again, there's probably much more that we want to do there beyond just what's in the CIS benchmark, for instance. When you look at the CIS benchmark for AWS, and it doesn't cover a broad set of services. It covers a few core services, and so there's more that we want to do. These are both areas where we would love to hear additional feedback as well. So what other, are there particular rules, particular things that are important for you that you want to check, that you think should just be built into the product? Are there particular sources of rules and benchmarks that you think are particularly important? We'd love to hear that feedback from you as you start to use this tool and explore what it can do. So with that said, I'm going to hop over to the demo. So just real quick here, if you haven't seen it before, this is the Snyk interface. Let me make it slightly bigger so it's a little easier to see on the webinar. And so what I've got here, you'll have your dashboard, your projects. As far as integrations go, as I mentioned before, you can integrate with infrastructure as code. We started with the source control integrations, but we do plan to do more. There's a number of other integrations here that tie into things like our Snyk container product, which also covers some Kubernetes. There's CI integrations and on here. For infrastructure as code, the main integration today is via the source code managers. What I've done here is, as I've imported from a Git repo, you can do that easily by setting up that integration between whatever your source code manager is and and Snyk, and then you simply add a project and you connect to your repo, and you can import it. So I've already done that here. In the interest of time, you'll notice that I've imported a repo here and it's found several things. So I've got the infrastructure as code files here. I've got a Kubernetes deployment and I've got some Terraform configuration files as well. But I've also picked up a couple other things. So I've got my open source dependencies, again, all from one scan. So this happens to be a node package in this application. And then I've also got a Docker file so I can get some container results from this. And again, that all comes from one import. I'm going to focus just on the infrastructure as code since that's what everybody's here to see today. And this is our Kubernetes YAML in this case. And again, as I mentioned before, you can see the side-by-side view of the information here. We wanted to make this very simple for folks to use. So if I see, for instance, on the right side, there's this red line telling me that there's something severe, I can click on it and it highlights it over on the left side and kind of opens up that issue view for me. Gives me the path so I know I can follow down through the YAML where the setting should be, what the actual setting is, and then some information about what that setting should be. And I can do that for other areas here as well. You also notice that each of these issues has a severity with it. We supply these severities based on our own research and based on what the benchmarks and others say in terms of severity. It's not like a vulnerability, obviously, though. There's no CVE behind this. And so with that in mind, some people have a different view about what the severity should be. And these can actually be edited. So I'll show you that here in just a second. But you can change this if you feel like you're running on a platform that doesn't allow containers to run as root. Therefore, it's not as important for your developers to configure this particular setting. Then you can make this low or you could make it none to make it go away. You can also ignore specific issues. So in this particular check, I could ignore this issue if I wanted to. And again, a very similar flow to what you would see in Snyk open source or Snyk container when you ignore a particular issue, and what you've probably seen in other systems where you would set up an ignore and kind of provide some details and to set up an audit trail for why somebody wanted to ignore an issue. So that's where we've started in terms of the interface for developers. I'll show you the CLI here in a minute. Some things that we're looking at for the future, and again, more areas where we'd love to hear additional feedback on what your optimal process would be as you start to think about how you might use a product like this. We've started with information, right? And so none of this is going to go and automatically start changing your deployment files or changing your Terraform files and screwing up your infrastructure or anything like that. Most people that we talk to don't want that to happen. They don't want that to happen ever, but they certainly don't want it to happen right out of the box. And so they're looking at more of a phased approach. Let's start with an informational type context. We can provide this to developers. Let's put it where they work. So, admittedly, this is in our Snyk UI. A lot of developers don't use this UI. We don't, always want developers to go into a different console for everything. And so, we have the CLI and we have places where it integrates with CI, and we're looking at things like the IDE. So we'd love to hear your feedback on where you think that would be most useful. But we want to provide this same type of information. But beyond just providing the information, the next step might be to show people how this gets fixed, right? So you could do a fix PR, and it could be manual or it could be in a Git status or something to show what the recommended change would be. And then you could look at the long sort of tail of this being, let's auto fix things, and we're going to start enforcing this and being, being a little more forceful about what's right and what's wrong, particularly with things that we've judged to be high severity. So that's a process that we're looking at, and one that customers have talked about. If there's other ideas that you have that you think would work better for you, again, an area where we would love to hear your feedback. I'll show you where you can set the different configuration settings in here. And this is also, by the way, how you enable this in your account. So everybody that's here today should have access to this. If you have a Snyk account, if you don't, you can sign up for a Snyk account for free. And when you get in there, you should, under your settings, you should have infrastructure as code available. If you click on that, depending on when you set up your Snyk account, you may have to click this little enabled button for it to actually start identifying files from your Git repos. So make sure you do that. If you do that, then you're pretty much ready to go. And then underneath here is where you have the actual individual rules that we are checking today. So Kubernetes and Terraform are both listed here. And this is also where you can come and at an organizational level, you can set the different severities. So I turned this one down to low. Today I've decided I want this running container and privilege mode to be high severity, and so I'm going to adjust it there. Now for all the future checks that I do, this will show up as high by default. If we look at some of the rules here, again, this is an area where we continue to add every week or so. When I log into this console, there are additional rules that we've added. As I said, we've got security folks who are adding rules and doing research here to continue to add rules to the set. If you look at Kubernetes, a lot of the rules are kind of grouped by Kubernetes type objects. So we have deployments, which could be individual pods, or they could be the various deployment objects within Kubernetes. We have services, we have pod security policies themselves. So if you have a pod security policy, we can actually run a check against that and see what's in there. And then some network policies too. So again, an area where we continue to expand and add additional rules, and we'll continue to do that over time as we go forward. Terraform, very much the same in terms of look and feel and how it works. I can change, I can change the severities on these as well. These are grouped a little bit closer to Terraform resources, so the things that you would actually create with Terraform when you do this. And you'll see today these are all AWS things because that's the provider that we started with. But very much the same in that we are continuing to expand the number of rules and the types of rules that we have in here and available for use. I'll show you very quickly the CLI tool as well. As I mentioned, we've started with some basic CLI capabilities. So you can see here, I've got this is that same web service that we just looked at in the from the Git import. Here I've got it that repo cloned locally. You can see I've got a deployment YAML file here, and if I do a Snyk IAC test on that deployment, it'll go out and it will scan it for me. Now, obviously, in the CLI view, we don't get the super pretty side-by-side view. We still get the same types of information, right? So we have information about what this particular issue is and where this should be addressed in my deployment YAML in this case. And we have the severity information here as well. We've started with Kubernetes for this, for the CLI functionality specifically. And so today, as of today, it doesn't do Terraform yet, but that's coming very soon. But you can do this if you have the Snyk CLI. Again, if you sign up for a free Snyk account, you can get the Snyk CLI and use that for free as long as you have the latest version. If you just upgrade or update your Snyk CLI to make sure you have the latest version, you should have the Snyk IAC functionality available to you. All right, I'm gonna go back here. And at this point, that's the demo. That's Snyk infrastructure as code. I wanted to see if there were any questions that we wanted to answer. If you have additional things that you want to talk to us about one-on-one, we'd love to talk to you. As I said before, we'd love to hear feedback, what you want to see in the product. Are there other formats? Are there other rule types or benchmarks or things like that that you want to include? What's your process? How do you think you would introduce something like this to development teams across the board, and what can we do to make that as easy as possible for you? So those are some things that we'd love to hear from you on, but we'll look and see if there's any questions. Ben, did you see any that you wanted to call out specifically?
Yeah, hey Jim. So there's one that's come in here that says, are you able to import infrastructure as code that is on premium, not directly available via the internet? I I understand that question to be about, can we import code that is perhaps on kind of an on-premise installation? The answer is yes, if you're using the other Snyk functionality called the broker, which is a piece of functionality that will kind of sit between, for example, your GitHub Enterprise, and then that connects to the kind of Snyk SaaS product, so you get all that functionality. So yes, that's possible today.
Perfect. Yeah, I see. It looks like there was a follow-up question about on-prem Bitbucket. Yeah, so that'd be the same thing, right, with that broker.
Yeah, and then do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go. There was one about checking container images for security issues. I just want to address that one real quick. So we can do that. It's not the same product, but it's all in that same Snyk interface. So you saw that I had pulled in a Docker file from a Get import, and so that's a capability that we have that's actually technically in beta today, but we can enable it for you if you want. But we do scan container images for vulnerabilities. So there is functionality in Snyk to do that. Again, the idea there being we want to provide information to developers specifically. I mean, obviously the security information is important, and usually security is kind of driving the initiative to make this happen. Security generally knows what they want their developers to do in terms of building good, secure container images. Docker has best practices for these things, all those sort of things. But we want to provide information around those vulnerabilities that helps the developer actually fix them. And so we specifically provide information about base image fixes. So we give you the vulnerabilities, but also saying, look, there's 700 that came from this base image. If you just change your base image, you can knock out 600 vulnerabilities at once. And then, in your own lines of the Docker file where you started to add packages, this is where, this is the line that introduced these 10 vulnerabilities and that kind of thing. So again, making it very quick for a developer to say, oh yeah, this is the line, I just need to adjust this, and all right, need to try a new base image, and I can fix those vulnerabilities. So a little bit different take on it. But to answer the question, yes, Snyk definitely provides that ability to scan.
Cool.
Scan container images.
Thanks, Jim. There's a few here that I might bunch together that are kind of around the coverage of what we can scan for. So specifically, is Azure provider supported for Terraform? The answer is not today, but we intend to add that along with all of the other destinations like you would expect, kind of GCP, CloudFormation, etc. So as Jim mentioned, these things will continue to be added to the product. There's some interest as well around, will we make similar checks for AWS ECS, so their container service, as we do for Kubernetes? Again, yes, we will continue to kind of roll out new policies. A lot of this is based on kind of prioritization, so please keep this feedback coming. And then it sounds like there's some interest in detecting passwords and kind of secrets in source code as well. Again, it's not something we do today, but it's something that's very much kind of in the direction and vision of the product, and something that we intend to add on to kind of the roadmap. So yes, is kind of the answer to that question.
Yeah, there's one here too that's interesting about, Terraform now supports languages other than HCL. So sounds like they're trying to build some sort of SDKs around Terraform, which I'm not as familiar with, but I've seen that in other formats, like, instead of using CloudFormation directly, AWS is building a CDK or built a CDK, and others too. So it's a question around whether we're looking at those and considering those. I think, the answer is yes. In the future, we definitely, we'll certainly consider those as the adoption kind of picks up and we see that and customers want it. I think that pretty much covers most of the questions that we had in the panel. Again, this is an area where we're very much seeking, and love to hear your feedback. As I mentioned today, you can get started with Snyk Infrastructure as Code for free. It should be available in all of your accounts if you've got a Snyk account. If you don't, again, free to sign up for Snyk, free to start doing tests. You can do 300 infrastructure as code tests every month for free. And you can do container tests for free. You can do open source tests for free. So if you're brand new to Snyk, I encourage you to sign up and get going. If you want to chat with us, great way to set that up here. But we'd love to hear your feedback as you go forward. Aside from that, we'll wrap up for today. I appreciate everybody joining us. Really do thank you for your time, and hope you get a chance to try out Snyk Infrastructure as Code and share your feedback with us. Thanks, everybody.